The letter trembled in Katherine Nielson's hands, her future crumbling with each carefully penned word. It was May of 1882, and the Arizona Territory sun beat down mercilessly on Springerville's dusty Main Street, much like her fiancé's family had beaten down her spirit with their cruel dismissal. "Miss Nielson," the town doctor had said just 1 week prior, his voice gentle but his words devastating. "I regret to inform you that your condition means you will never bear children." At 22, Katherine had accepted the news with quiet dignity, her heart breaking silently as she nodded and thanked him. She hadn't expected Edward Thompson, her fiancé of 8 months, to react so poorly when she'd gathered her courage to tell him. Nor had she anticipated his mother's swift action to end their engagement, citing the need for heirs to continue their mercantile dynasty. Now, she stood on the boardwalk outside Nielson's dress shop, her family's modest business, fighting back tears as she read Edward's formal letter of disengagement. People bustled past her on the busy thoroughfare, but Katherine felt utterly alone in her humiliation. "Miss Nielson, you look like you've seen a ghost." The deep voice startled her. Katherine hastily folded the letter and looked up to find Blake Gentry watching her with concern in his deep blue eyes. The tall cowboy stood a respectful distance away, his broad shoulders blocking the morning sun. At 28, Blake was well known throughout Apache County as the foreman of the Lazy R Ranch, the largest cattle operation in the territory. "Mr. Gentry," she acknowledged, trying to compose herself. "Just some unfortunate correspondence." Blake shifted his weight, dust rising from his worn boots. "Unfortunate enough to drain the color from your face. Pardon my forwardness, but I've always thought your smile could outshine the Arizona sun." Despite herself, Katherine felt a faint blush rise to her cheeks. Blake Gentry had always been polite during his infrequent visits to town, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. She'd been engaged to Edward, after all, and Blake wasn't the type to overstep. "The Thompsons have called off our engagement," she said, surprised by her own candor. "It seems I am unsuitable as a wife for their son." Blake's expression darkened. "Edward Thompson couldn't be suitable for a woman like you if he tried for 100 years. Katherine glanced down at the letter in her hand. "His mother discovered I cannot have children. Apparently, that makes me worthless as a bride." She hadn't meant to reveal something so personal, but something in Blake's steadfast gaze made the truth spill out before she could stop it. To her surprise, he didn't look embarrassed or pitying. Instead, his jaw tightened with something that looked remarkably like anger. "Then the Thompsons are bigger fools than I took them for," he said flatly. "And I already thought them pretty foolish." A reluctant smile tugged at Katherine's lips. "You shouldn't say such things, Mr. Gentry." "Blake," he corrected. "And I'll say what's true. Any man worth his salt would count himself lucky to have you, children or no." The unexpected kindness in his words nearly undid her composure. Katherine swallowed hard and smoothed her skirts, desperate for something to do with her hands. "You're kind to say so, but I'm afraid most wouldn't agree. A woman's primary purpose is to bear children, after all." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Blake took off his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. "Begging your pardon, Miss Nielson, but that's horse manure. A woman's worth isn't measured by how many babies she can birth." Katherine stared at him, startled by his bluntness and the conviction in his voice. "I should get back inside," she said finally, gesturing toward the dress shop where her younger sister Lily would be wondering about her prolonged absence. "Thank you for your colorful perspective, Mr. Gentry." "Blake," he reminded her again, "and Miss Nielson. Don't you let those Thompsons convince you you're anything less than what you are." "And what am I, Mr. Gentry?" she asked, unable to keep the challenge from her voice. His eyes met hers steadily. "The finest woman in Springerville, maybe in the whole territory." With that, he tipped his hat, placed it back on his head, and continued down the boardwalk, leaving Katherine staring after him with her heart beating unexpectedly fast. Inside the dress shop, Lily pounced immediately. "Was that Blake Gentry you were talking to? What did he want?" Katherine set the letter on the counter, trying to sound casual. "Nothing in particular. He was just being neighborly." Lily, barely 19 and full of romantic notions, gave her sister a skeptical look. "Blake Gentry doesn't stop to chat with ladies without a reason. Half the unmarried women in 3 counties would give their best Sunday dress for his attention." "Don't be ridiculous," Katherine chided, though she knew her sister wasn't exaggerating. Blake Gentry was considered quite a catch, handsome, successful, and by all accounts honorable. "He was merely being kind. He saw I was upset about this." She gestured to Edward's letter, and Lily's expression softened immediately. "Oh, Kathy, did Edward really?" "Yes," Katherine said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "His mother wrote most of it, I imagine. She never approved of me to begin with, and now she has her perfect excuse." Lily's eyes flashed with indignation. "They're terrible people. You're better off without them. Any man who would throw you aside for such a reason doesn't deserve you." Katherine smiled weakly at her sister's fierce loyalty. "It doesn't change the fact that I'm now 22, publicly jilted, and unlikely to receive any other offers, not once word spreads about my condition." "That's not true," Lily insisted. "There are good men who care about more than just heirs. Like Blake Gentry, for instance. I've heard he's not interested in having a large family. His own upbringing was difficult, with too many mouths to feed." Katherine busied herself with straightening a bolt of calico fabric. "Mr. Gentry's preferences are hardly relevant to my situation, Lily. Now we have work to do. Mrs. Hendricks is coming at noon for her fitting." As the day wore on, Katherine threw herself into her work, grateful for the distraction. The shop had been her mother's pride before illness took her 3 years ago, and Katherine had stepped into her role seamlessly, supporting her father and sister with her skilled needle and eye for fashion. It was honest work that brought her satisfaction, even if the Thompsons had looked down on it. By closing time, Katherine's fingers were sore from pinning and stitching, but her mind had found some measure of peace. She had just turned the sign to closed when a knock came at the door. Thinking it might be Mrs. Parker collecting her mended shirtwaist, Katherine opened it without checking first. Blake Gentry stood on the threshold, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Mr. Gentry," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Miss Nielson," he replied with a slight nod. "I apologize for coming by so late, but I was wondering if you might permit me to escort you to supper at the hotel dining room." Katherine stared at him, momentarily speechless. "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly. I understand if you'd prefer not to be seen in public so soon after your engagement ended," Blake said quickly. "I didn't think of that. Perhaps another time." "It's not that," Katherine said, though it partially was. "It's just, people will talk." Blake's expression remained steady. "People always talk, especially in a town this size. Question is, do you care more about what they say or about eating a decent meal that you don't have to cook yourself?" The unexpected humor in his tone made Katherine smile despite herself. "When you put it that way, Mr. Gentry, a meal I don't have to prepare does sound appealing." "Blake," he corrected for the 3rd time that day, a hint of exasperation creeping into his voice. "Blake," she conceded, feeling oddly daring. "I need to tell my father and sister where I'll be, but then, yes, I would be pleased to join you for supper." His smile transformed his face, revealing a dimple in his left cheek that Katherine had never noticed before. "I'll wait right here." 15 minutes later, they were seated at a corner table in the Grand Hotel's dining room, the finest establishment in Springerville. Katherine was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. News of her broken engagement would have spread through town by now, and here she was, dining with another man the very same day. "Everyone is staring," she murmured, nervously smoothing her napkin. Blake took a sip of water, looking unconcerned. "Let them. You've done nothing wrong." "Society might disagree." "Society," Blake said with quiet intensity, "can go hang, begging your pardon for the language." Katherine couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. "You're rather unconventional, Mr. Gentry." "Blake," he reminded her patiently. "And yes, I suppose I am. Life's too short to worry about what people like Judith Thompson think is proper." At the mention of Edward's mother, Katherine stiffened. "You know her well." "Well enough to know she's been pushing Edward to break things off with you since you got engaged. Your family may be respectable, but they don't have the kind of money or connections she wants." Katherine set down her fork, appetite suddenly diminished. "I see, and how do you know this?" Blake looked slightly uncomfortable. "I hear things. The ranch hands talk. And Edward's not exactly discreet when he's had a few drinks at Donovan's saloon." The thought of Edward discussing her with other men over whiskey made Katherine's cheeks burn with humiliation. "I suppose everyone knows my private business now." Blake leaned forward, his expression earnest. "No. Whatever Edward may have said, your personal situation isn't common knowledge, and it won't be from me." Katherine studied him, trying to understand his motives. "Why are you being so kind to me, Mr. Blake? We've hardly spoken before today." He hesitated, then spoke with careful honesty. "I've watched you for a while now, Miss Nielson. How you took over the shop after your mother passed. How you care for your father and sister. How you always have a kind word for everyone, even old Mrs. Whittaker, who complains about everything under the sun." Katherine blinked in surprise. She hadn't realized he'd paid her such close attention. "I've admired you," he continued, "from a distance because you were spoken for, but I always thought Edward Thompson was a damn fool who didn't appreciate what he had." "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now I think I'd like to know you better if you'll allow it." Katherine looked down at her plate, conflicting emotions swirling within her. "I'm not sure that's wise. You know about my condition. Any man who courts me would have to accept a future without children." Blake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and certain. "There are different ways to make a family, Katherine. Children born to you isn't the only way." She looked up sharply at his use of her first name, but couldn't find it in herself to object. "Most men want sons of their own blood. I'm not most men." His blue eyes held her steadily. "I was the oldest of 8, watched my mother work herself to death bearing and raising children while my father drank away what little money we had. 3 of my siblings didn't live to see their 5th birthday." Katherine's heart ached at the pain evident in his voice. "I don't need children of my own," Blake continued. "What I want is a partner, someone to build a life with, someone who makes me want to be a better man just by being herself." Katherine felt a curious warmth spreading through her chest at his words. "You make it sound so simple." "It can be, if we let it." Blake reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin. "I'm not asking for anything right now except the chance to know you better. We can start as friends." Katherine found herself nodding. "Friends," she agreed softly. "I think I would like that." Blake's smile returned, warming his entire face. "Good. Now, are you going to finish that steak? Because Cook Matthews will take personal offense if you don't clean your plate. He considers his steaks the best this side of the Mississippi." The tension broken. Katherine laughed and picked up her fork again. "We can't have that, can we? I've heard he has quite the temper." "Legendary," Blake confirmed with mock seriousness. "They say he once chased the mayor 3 blocks with a rolling pin for suggesting his biscuits were overdone." As they continued their meal, conversation flowing more easily with each passing minute, Katherine felt something she hadn't expected to feel again so soon after Edward's rejection. Hope. Outside the hotel after their meal, Blake offered his arm to escort her home. The evening air was cool, a welcome relief after the heat of the day. Stars glittered overhead, seemingly close enough to touch in the clear desert sky. "Thank you for supper," Katherine said as they walked slowly down the quiet street. "I enjoyed myself more than I thought possible today." "I'm glad," Blake replied simply. "I did too." When they reached the modest house behind the dress shop where Katherine lived with her father and sister, Blake stopped at the gate. "I'll be in town for a few more days, handling some business for the ranch," he said. "Would you allow me to call on you again?" Katherine hesitated only briefly. "Yes, I would like that." Blake smiled, tipped his hat, and bid her good night, waiting until she was safely inside before turning away. Through the window, Katherine watched his tall figure moving down the moonlit street, wondering at the strange turn her life had taken in just one day. Inside, her father looked up from his newspaper with raised eyebrows. "Blake Gentry, eh? Moving on rather quickly, aren't you, Kathy?" The question stung, but Katherine saw no judgment in her father's weathered face, only concern. "It was just supper, Pa. He was being kind after what happened with Edward." Thomas Nielson set aside his paper with a sigh. "Edward Thompson never deserved you, Kathy. His mother's had her nose so high in the air for so long, it's a wonder she doesn't drown when it rains." Despite everything, Katherine laughed. Blake said something similar, actually. Her father's eyes twinkled. "Did he now? Always thought that Gentry boy had good sense. Started with nothing and built himself up to foreman at the Lazy R before he was 25. Owns his own piece of land now, too, from what I hear." "Pa," Katherine admonished gently, "you make it sound as if you're already planning the wedding." Thomas sobered. "I just want you happy, Kathy." "After what the doctor told you." "Well, I worried you might give up on finding someone. Not all men are like Edward Thompson, thank the Lord." Katherine kissed her father's forehead. "I know, Pa, and I haven't given up, but Blake and I are just friends for now." "For now," her father echoed with a knowing smile that Katherine chose to ignore. As she prepared for bed that night, Katherine found her thoughts drifting repeatedly to Blake's words at dinner. The easy way he dismissed her condition as an obstacle, his talk of different ways to make a family. It was too soon to hope, she told herself firmly. She'd known the real Blake Gentry for less than a day. And yet, she fell asleep with the memory of his steady blue eyes and the comforting thought that perhaps, just perhaps, her future wasn't as bleak as it had seemed that morning. True to his word, Blake called on Katherine the following afternoon. And the next. By the third day, Lily was beside herself with excitement, and even Katherine's father seemed pleased by the development. "He's asking your permission for something," Lily whispered to Katherine on the fourth day, after observing Blake and their father in deep conversation on the porch. "I'm certain of it," Katherine shushed her sister, though her own heart raced at the possibility. Over the past few days, she'd found herself increasingly drawn to Blake's steady presence and thoughtful conversation. He told her about his plans for his own ranch someday, about the small parcel of land he'd already purchased 15 miles outside town. She'd shared her dreams of expanding the dress shop, perhaps even selling her designs to the big department stores back east. When Blake suggested an afternoon buggy ride, Katherine wasn't entirely surprised to find her father readily agreeing, despite the potential for gossip given her recent broken engagement. "Your reputation will survive," Thomas Nielson said dryly, when Katherine expressed concern. "And if it doesn't, well, Springerville isn't the only town in the Arizona territory." The afternoon was glorious, the late spring weather perfect for a drive through the countryside surrounding Springerville. Blake handled the horses with expert ease, pointing out various landmarks and sharing stories about his 8 years in the territory. "It's beautiful here," Katherine said as they paused at a scenic overlook, the vast expanse of high desert and distant mountains spreading before them. "So different from Pennsylvania. Do you miss it, the green?" Blake asked. Katherine considered the question. "Sometimes, but there's something about the openness here. The sky seems bigger somehow, full of possibility." Blake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's what drew me west. After my mother died and the younger children went to my aunt in Kansas City, I needed space to breathe, to figure out who I was apart from being the oldest son, the responsible one." "And have you figured it out?" Katherine asked softly. Blake turned to face her, his expression serious. "I'm still working on it, but I know what I want now, and that's a start." Something in his tone made Katherine's pulse quicken. "What do you want, Blake?" He reached for her hand slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he enclosed her smaller hand in his calloused one. "I want to court you properly, Katherine, not just as friends." Katherine felt a fluttering in her chest. "Blake, you know what the doctor said about children." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I told you before, I want you, not children, I meant it." "But no buts," he interrupted gently. "I know my own mind, Katherine. I've watched you for 2 years, always from a distance because you were promised to another man. Now you're not, and I don't intend to waste any more time." Katherine stared at him, caught between disbelief and a dangerous hope. "2 years? You've been watching me for 2 years?" A flush crept up Blake's neck. "I didn't mean it to sound so. I wasn't following you around or anything improper. I just noticed you, how you treated people. How hard you worked. How you smiled even on days when I knew things were difficult for your family." Katherine was speechless. While she'd been planning a future with Edward, this man had been quietly admiring her from afar, seeing qualities in her that Edward had never seemed to notice. "I don't expect an answer right now," Blake continued when she remained silent. "I know this is sudden, especially after what happened with Thompson. Take all the time you need." Katherine found her voice at last. "People will talk. They'll say I'm fickle, or that we've been carrying on behind Edward's back all along." "Let them," Blake said simply. "We know the truth." Katherine looked out at the sweeping landscape, then back to Blake's earnest face. In the 4 days since Edward's rejection, she'd felt more valued, more seen by this man than she had during her entire 8-month engagement. "Yes," she said finally. Blake's eyebrows rose. "Yes. Yes, you may court me, Blake Gentry." A smile curved her lips. "But I do have conditions." His answering smile was bright enough to rival the Arizona sun. "Name them. We take our time. No hasty proposals just because you've been watching me for 2 years." She gave him a teasing look that made his cheeks redden again. "I want to know you just as well as you seem to know me." "Fair enough," Blake agreed. "What else?" "You need to be absolutely certain about the children issue. I won't have you changing your mind 2 years into a marriage, resenting me for something I cannot help." Blake's expression sobered. "Katherine, listen to me. I meant what I said about family. There are children who need homes, orphans, or we could simply build our life together, just the 2 of us. I've seen enough of big families to know they don't guarantee happiness." Katherine studied his face, searching for any hint of insincerity. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "All right. I believe you." "Good." Blake hesitated, then added, "May I ask you something personal?" After everything we've discussed these past few days, I think we're beyond standing on ceremony, Blake. Did you love him? Thompson, the question caught Katherine off guard. She considered it carefully, wanting to be honest. I thought I did, but now I wonder if I was more in love with the idea of him, the security of being a merchant's wife, the respectability. When he ended things, it was the humiliation that hurt most, not losing him specifically. She paused. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? Blake shook his head. It sounds honest, and I'm glad to hear it selfishly enough. And what about you? Katherine asked. Have you been in love before? Once, Blake admitted, when I first came to the territory. She was the ranch owner's daughter, Claire Easton, beautiful, spirited. She chose a banker from Tucson instead, probably for the best. I was just a ranch hand then, with nothing to offer a woman like her. I'm sorry, Katherine said sincerely. Blake shrugged. Don't be. If things had worked out with Claire, I wouldn't be sitting here with you now, and there's nowhere I'd rather be. The simple declaration warmed Katherine from within. Before she could respond, Blake leaned forward slightly, his intent clear in his eyes. May I? Katherine nodded, her breath catching as Blake closed the distance between them. His lips met hers gently, a brief, sweet kiss that ended too quickly for Katherine's liking. When he pulled back, his eyes were questioning. That was nice, Katherine said, suddenly shy. Blake grinned. Just nice. I'll have to do better next time. I look forward to it, she replied with more boldness than she felt, and was rewarded with a startled laugh from Blake. As they drove back toward town, Katherine couldn't help but marvel at how drastically her life had changed in less than a week. From the devastation of learning she could never have children and losing her fiancé, to this new beginning with a man who seemed to value her for exactly who she was. It was too soon to call it love, she told herself firmly. But it felt dangerously like the beginning of something much deeper, much truer than what she'd shared with Edward. And for the first time since the doctor had delivered his grim news, Katherine allowed herself to hope unreservedly for the future. News of Blake and Katherine's courtship spread through Springerville like wildfire. Some, like Lily and Thomas Nielson, were openly supportive. Others, particularly those in the Thompsons' social circle, were less kind in their assessments. They're saying I trapped you somehow, Katherine told Blake one evening 3 weeks into their courtship, as they sat on her father's porch swing. That I must have thrown myself at you the moment Edward ended things. Blake took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. And we both know that's nonsense. Besides, if anyone did the pursuing, it was me, Katherine sighed, leaning her head against his shoulder. I knew there would be talk, but some of it is so vicious. Judith Thompson's doing, most likely, Blake said, his voice hardening. That woman has a tongue like a viper. Edward came into the shop yesterday, Katherine admitted, feeling Blake stiffen beside her. He wanted to apologize, he said, claimed his mother forced him to break the engagement. Blake's jaw tightened visibly. And what did you tell him? That a man who truly loved a woman wouldn't let his mother dictate who he could marry. That I was grateful to have discovered his weakness of character before the wedding, not after. A slow smile spread across Blake's face. I wish I could have seen his face. He didn't take it well, Katherine said, remembering Edward's flushed face and sputtering response. He implied that you only want me because you know I can't have children, that you're afraid of responsibility. Blake's hand tightened around hers. That sounds like Edward. Always projecting his own failings onto others. He turned to face Katherine directly. You know that's not true, right? That's not why I'm here with you. Katherine nodded, though a small seed of doubt had taken root since Edward's visit. I know, but Blake, it is convenient, isn't it? That I can't give you the children you don't want. Blake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and intense. Katherine, If you could have a dozen children, I'd still be sitting right here beside you. The way I feel about you has nothing to do with whether you can bear children." "And how do you feel about me?" Katherine asked, her heart pounding. Blake reached up to touch her face gently. "I think you know. I want to hear you say it." Blake's blue eyes held hers steadily. "I'm falling in love with you, Katherine Nielson. Probably have been since the first time I saw you comforting little Tommy Wilson when he fell and skinned his knee outside your shop 2 years ago." Katherine's breath caught. "Blake, you don't have to say anything back," he said quickly. "I know it's soon. I just wanted you to know that it's real for me. The most real thing I've ever felt." Katherine leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a wordless answer that seemed to satisfy Blake completely. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Thank you for seeing me. The real me." "Always," he promised, and Katherine believed him. As spring gave way to summer, their courtship deepened. Blake extended his stay in Springerville, making arrangements with the ranch owner to manage business in town rather than returning to the Lazy R. Katherine learned about his dreams for his own land, the house he planned to build, the small herd of cattle he was slowly acquiring. "It won't be a grand ranch like the Lazy R," he told her as they rode out to see his property one bright July morning. "But it will be ours. Something we build together." Katherine's heart skipped at the casual way he included her in his future plans. "It's beautiful, Blake." And it was. 15 miles from town, the 100-acre parcel featured a small stream, rolling hills, and a perfect spot for a house overlooking the valley. Blake had already started construction, the foundation and frame of a modest but sturdy home taking shape against the landscape. "The men from the Lazy R have been helping on their days off," Blake explained as he helped Katherine down from her horse. "Paying me back for favors over the years, they say. Though I think they're mostly curious about the woman who's got me building a proper house instead of living in a line shack." Katherine laughed, picturing the rough cowboys speculating about their foreman's love life. "And what have you told them about me?" "That you're the finest seamstress in 3 territories, with a smile that could melt the snow off Mount Baldy in January, and that I'm the luckiest man alive, that Edward Thompson is a fool." Katherine swatted his arm playfully. "You did not say that." Blake grinned, catching her hand and pulling her close. Maybe not in those exact words, but the sentiment was the same. As they walked the property, Blake pointing out where he planned to build the barn, the corrals, the kitchen garden, Katherine found herself fully sharing his vision. She could see herself here, making a home with this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly. "What are you thinking?" Blake asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Katherine smiled, looking around at the half-built house and the sweeping views beyond. "I'm thinking that I love you, Blake Gentry." Blake went still, his eyes widening slightly. "Say that again." "I love you," Katherine repeated, her voice stronger. "I wasn't looking for this for you, but here you are and here I am, and I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." Blake's answering smile was brilliant. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, lifting Katherine off her feet in a joyous embrace before setting her down and kissing her thoroughly. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Blake reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment," he said, a slight tremor in his normally steady voice. "I think this might be it." Katherine's heart raced as Blake opened the pouch and tipped a ring into his palm, a simple gold band set with a modest diamond that caught the sunlight. "It was my mother's," Blake explained. "The only thing of value my father never managed to drink away or gamble off. I had it sized for you in Tucson last month." He dropped to one knee, looking up at Katherine with such naked hope in his eyes that it made her throat tighten with emotion. "Katherine Nielson, I know we agreed to take our time, and if you're not ready, I'll wait as long as you need. But I love you, and I want to build a life with you, just you, no matter what that means or what people say. Will you marry me? Catherine's vision blurred with tears as she nodded, not trusting her voice. Blake slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and gathered her close, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Yes, Katherine managed finally, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you, Blake Gentry. Later, as they rode back toward town with the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Katherine marveled at the unexpected path her life had taken. 3 months ago, she had been engaged to Edward Thompson, living with a secret dread about her inability to have children and what it might mean for her future. Now, she was riding beside a man who knew her completely flaws, limitations, and all and loved her anyway. What are you smiling about? Blake asked, guiding his horse closer to hers. Just thinking about how sometimes the things that seem like disasters turn out to be blessings in disguise, Katherine replied. If Edward hadn't ended our engagement, I might never have known what it feels like to be truly loved for myself. Blake reached across the space between them to squeeze her hand. Edward's loss is my gain, and I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt how much I love you, exactly as you are. As they rode into Springerville, the gold band on Katherine's finger catching the last rays of sunlight, she felt a peace she hadn't known was possible settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with Blake by her side, a man who wanted her, not children, and who had shown her that family could be defined by love rather than blood. The news of their engagement spread through Springerville just as quickly as the news of their courtship had. This time, however, Katherine found herself caring less about the whispers and sideways glances. Blake's love was like a shield against the small-mindedness of town gossip. Lily, of course, was ecstatic. "I knew it," she crowed when Katherine showed her the ring. "From the moment he started calling on you, I just knew he was the one." Her father was more restrained in his reaction, but his eyes were suspiciously moist when Blake formally asked for his blessing. "You'll take care of my girl," Thomas Nielson said, more statement than question. "With everything I have," Blake promised solemnly. They set the wedding date for October, when the weather would be cool and Blake's house would be completed. Katherine threw herself into planning, designing her own wedding dress, a cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery that showcased her considerable talent. "You'll be the most beautiful bride this territory has ever seen," Blake told her after a particularly long day of preparations, when Katherine was fretting over details. "There's still so much to do," Katherine sighed, leaning against him as they sat on the porch swing that had become their favorite spot for evening conversations. "And your house, our house," Blake corrected gently. "Our house," Katherine amended with a smile, "won't be ready for weeks yet." "The roof isn't even on." "It will be," Blake assured her. "The men are working double time. They want to see me settled before winter as much as I do." Katherine rested her head on his shoulder. "I can hardly believe it's really happening. Sometimes I wake up thinking it's all been a dream." Blake pressed a kiss to her temple. "If it is, I don't ever want to wake up." As summer faded into early autumn, the Thompsons made one last attempt to disturb Katherine's happiness. Judith Thompson, upon hearing of the engagement, spread rumors that Katherine had somehow deceived Edward about her condition, that she had trapped Blake through some form of manipulation, and that the hasty wedding was to cover up some imagined impropriety. "Ignore her," Lily advised when Katherine came home from the shop one day, upset after overhearing 2 women discussing the latest gossip. "Everyone with any sense knows she's just bitter because you found someone better than her precious Edward." "I know," Katherine said, wiping away an angry tear. "I just hate that she's trying to taint something so important to me, to us." Blake's response when he heard was more direct. He confronted Edward outside the bank in full view of half the town, his voice carrying clearly across the street. "Your mother needs to keep my fiancé's name out of her mouth, Thompson," he said, his tone deceptively calm. "The rumors stop now, or you and I are going to have a serious problem." Edward, never known for his courage, had paled visibly. "I can't control what my mother says, Gentry." "Then I suggest you learn how," Blake had replied before walking away, leaving Edward standing awkwardly as onlookers pretended not to stare. The confrontation, while not Katherine's preferred method of handling the situation, had been effective. The rumors died down almost immediately, and Judith Thompson suddenly found pressing business in Tucson that would keep her away until after the wedding. "You shouldn't have done that," Katherine admonished Blake that evening, though she couldn't quite hide her satisfaction. "Confronting Edward publicly only gives people more to talk about." "Maybe," Blake agreed, not looking particularly repentant. "But no one talks about my future wife that way, not even Judith Thompson." Katherine shook her head, but secretly she was touched by his protective instinct. Edward had never once stood up to his mother on Katherine's behalf, always finding excuses for Judith's cutting remarks and subtle insults. As October approached, their house neared completion. Katherine rode out with him every few days to see the progress, each visit making their future together feel more real. The roof was on, the windows installed, the floors laid. Blake had even planted a small garden at Katherine's request, though it was too late in the season for much to grow. "Next spring," he promised as they stood looking at the freshly turned earth. "You can plant whatever you like, flowers, vegetables. I know nothing about gardening, so I'll leave that entirely in your capable hands." Katherine linked her arm through his. "I was thinking. There's plenty of room here. We could take in a child someday, an orphan like you mentioned." Blake looked down at her, a cautious hope in his eyes. "You'd want that." "I think I would," Katherine said honestly. "Not right away, I want time with just us first, but someday. Yes, I'd like to give a home to a child who needs one." Blake pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. "You're an extraordinary woman, Katherine Nielson." "Soon to be Katherine Gentry," she reminded him with a smile. "The best thing I've ever heard," Blake replied, kissing her softly. 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck. A fire broke out at the livery stable in the middle of the night, spreading quickly to nearby buildings in the high desert wind. The entire town turned out to fight the blaze, forming bucket brigades and working desperately to keep the fire from consuming all of Springerville. Blake, who had been staying at the hotel in town to be close to Katherine during the final wedding preparations, was one of the first to respond. Katherine watched in horror as he and other men ran into burning buildings to save those trapped inside. "Be careful," she called out as Blake emerged from the milliner's shop, supporting Mrs. Harper, the elderly owner who lived above her business. Blake handed the coughing woman to a waiting doctor, then turned back toward the burning building. "There are others," he shouted over the roar of the flames. Before Katherine could protest, he had disappeared back into the inferno. Seconds stretched into minutes with no sign of him. Katherine's heart pounded painfully in her chest as she stared at the doorway, willing him to emerge, when the roof of the milliner's shop collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending sparks shooting skyward. Katherine's scream was lost in the general chaos. She lunged forward, only to be caught and held back by her father's strong arms. "You can't go in there, Kathy," he shouted. "The whole building's coming down." "Blake's in there," she cried, struggling against his grip. "Pa, please, I have to find him." For an eternity that was probably only minutes, Katherine watched in helpless horror as men directed streams of water at the burning building, the flames so intense now that no one dared approach. Tears streamed down her soot-stained face as she prayed more fervently than she ever had in her life. "Please, God," she whispered, "please don't take him from me, not now, not like this." And then, like an answer to her desperate prayer, there was movement at the side of the building. Blake staggered out of an alley, supporting two small children, the Harper grandchildren who had been staying with their grandmother. All three were covered in soot, coughing violently, but alive. Katherine broke free of her father's grasp and ran to them, reaching Blake just as his legs gave way. Together, they sank to the ground, the children quickly whisked away by waiting arms as Katherine cradled Blake's head in her lap. "You scared me half to death," she scolded through her tears, her hands moving frantically over him, checking for injuries. Blake coughed, a worrying rattle in his chest. "Couldn't. Leave them," he managed before another coughing fit overtook him. The doctor appeared beside them, his face grim as he listened to Blake's breathing. "Smoke inhalation," he diagnosed. "We need to get him somewhere he can rest, breathe clean air." They moved Blake to Katherine's home, the closest building untouched by the fire. For 3 days, Katherine barely left his side, bathing his face with cool cloths when fever set in, helping him drink the herbal teas the doctor prescribed for his damaged lungs, praying constantly for his recovery. On the 4th day, Blake's fever broke and he opened his eyes to find Katherine dozing in a chair beside his bed, her hand still holding his. "Katherine," he whispered, his voice raspy from the smoke and coughing. She startled awake immediately, relief washing over her face. "Blake." "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," he admitted with a weak attempt at humor. "But better than yesterday." Katherine pressed a kiss to his forehead, tears threatening again. "You nearly died, you fool, running back into that burning building." "Couldn't let those children die," Blake said simply. "Not when I could do something." And that, Katherine realized, was exactly why she loved him so fiercely. His instinct wasn't self-preservation, but protection of others even at great personal risk. "The wedding," Blake said suddenly, struggling to sit up. "How many days do we have left?" Katherine gently pushed him back against the pillows. "Don't worry about that now. We can postpone if necessary." Blake shook his head stubbornly. "No postponement." "I'm marrying you on October 12th as planned, Katherine Nielson, even if I have to be carried to the church." Katherine laughed despite herself. "You're impossible." "But you love me anyway," Blake replied with a shadow of his usual grin. "God help me, I do," Katherine agreed, her heart full to bursting with love for this brave, stubborn man. True to his word, Blake recovered enough by their wedding day to stand on his own 2 feet at the altar, though a persistent cough still troubled him at times. Katherine, radiant in her cream silk gown, felt only joy as she walked down the aisle of Springerville's small church on her father's arm. The ceremony was simple, but deeply meaningful. When Blake spoke his vows, his voice strong and clear despite his recent ordeal, promising to love, honor, and cherish Katherine all the days of his life, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. "I, Katherine, take you, Blake," she responded, her voice steady and sure. "To be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Blake's kiss was gentle but full of promise. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Gentry for the first time, Katherine felt a sense of completion she had never known was possible. The reception at the Grand Hotel was a joyous affair, with even those who had gossiped about their hasty courtship caught up in the evident happiness of the bride and groom. Blake and Katherine moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their hands rarely separating. "Are you happy, Mrs. Gentry?" Blake murmured in Katherine's ear as they shared the first dance. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Katherine replied truthfully, her eyes shining with love. "And you, Mr. Gentry?" "I'm holding everything I've ever wanted in my arms," Blake said simply. "How could I be anything but completely, utterly happy?" As the evening wound down, Blake and Katherine slipped away to begin the journey to their new home. The house was fully completed now, furnished with a mixture of Katherine's family pieces and new items Blake had ordered from Tucson. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was theirs, a place they had planned together, where they would build their life as husband and wife. When they reached the house, Blake insisted on carrying Katherine across the threshold despite his still recovering strength. "It's tradition," he said firmly when she protested. Inside, Katherine gasped softly. While she had seen the house during construction, she hadn't been out to visit in the final week before the wedding, busy with last-minute preparations. In that time, Blake had arranged for the women from the ranch to add finishing touches: curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed, wildflowers in vases on every surface. "It's perfect," Katherine whispered, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Absolutely perfect." Blake came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Gentry." Katherine turned in his embrace, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "I love you, Blake. Thank you for seeing value in me when I couldn't see it in myself." Blake's eyes were serious as he replied, "I will spend every day of our lives making sure you never doubt your worth again. You are everything to me, Katherine. Everything." As he lowered his mouth to hers, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that despite all the pain and heartbreak that had led to this moment, she was exactly where she was meant to be, with the man she was meant to love. The years that followed were not without challenges, but Katherine and Blake faced them together, their love growing stronger with each passing season. The ranch prospered under Blake's careful management, expanding gradually as they were able to purchase neighboring parcels of land. Katherine continued her dressmaking business, setting up a small workshop in their home and building a reputation that brought customers from as far away as Tucson and Santa Fe. 3 years into their marriage, they took in their first child, a 7-year-old boy named Jacob, whose parents had died of influenza. Quiet and withdrawn at first, Jacob blossomed under Blake and Katherine's patient care, eventually becoming a confident young man with Blake's love of ranching and Katherine's creative spirit. 2 years later, they welcomed twin girls, Mary and Margaret, orphaned in a stagecoach accident. At 4 years old, the girls brought a whirlwind of energy and laughter to the Gentry home, their matching red curls and mischievous grins melting even the most hardened ranch hand's heart. "Did you ever imagine our family would look like this?" Katherine asked Blake one evening as they sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching Jacob teach the twins how to rope using a small lariat Blake had made specially for them. Blake squeezed her hand, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way Katherine had always loved. "Better than I imagined," he replied honestly. "Much better." Katherine rested her head on his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Do you ever regret it, not having children of your own blood?" Blake turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Katherine, these are our children, in every way that matters." "I know," she hastened to assure him. "I feel the same way. Sometimes I still wonder if you secretly wish things could have been different." Blake was quiet for a moment, watching as Jacob patiently corrected Margaret's grip on the rope. "You know what I think?" I think if we'd had children of our own, maybe we wouldn't have had room in our lives for Jacob and the girls. And I can't imagine our family without them." Catherine's heart swelled with love for this man who had changed her life so completely. "Neither can I. Besides," Blake added with a grin, "I wouldn't trade a single moment of our life together, Katherine Gentry. Not one." As the sun set over the Arizona hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Edward's rejection, once so devastating, now seemed like a distant memory, a painful but necessary step on the path that led her to true happiness. Blake had kept his promise, loving her completely for who she was, building a family with her that defied conventional expectations, but was bound together by something stronger than blood choice. Every day they chose each other, chose their children, chose the life they had created together. "Mama, Papa, look," Mary called, executing a perfect twirl of the lariat under Jacob's proud supervision. "We're watching, sweetheart," Katherine called back, smiling at her daughter's accomplishment. Blake's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I love you, Katherine," he said softly, the words no less powerful for having been said thousands of times over their years together. "And I love you," Katherine replied, turning to press a kiss to his weathered cheek. "Always." As their children's laughter echoed across the ranch yard, Katherine silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought Blake Gentry into her life that day on Springerville's dusty Main Street. Her engagement breaking had seemed like an ending, but it had really been the beginning of a love story more beautiful than any she could have imagined, a story still being written, day by day, in the life they shared. When Katherine Nielson had received that devastating diagnosis, and then Edward's cruel rejection, she had thought her chance at happiness was over. Instead, it had only been waiting for her to find a man who understood that love wasn't about what she could or couldn't give him, but about who they were together. "I want you," Blake had said all those years ago, "not children." And in the end, life had given them both a love that was complete in itself, and a family created through the purest kind of love, choice.